About 24 texts from the Hittite world mention a polity called Ahhiyawa. In the 1920s, a Swiss philologist, Emile Fourier, suggested Ahhiyawa was related with Homer's Achaeans and suggested the Ahhiyawa of the Hittite sources is analogous to what modern scholars call the Mycenaean civilization. While Fourier's ideas were not initially accepted, most modern scholars accept his proposal that Ahhiyawa and its variant forms refer to the Bronze Age Aegean culture we call the Mycenaeans. So what's the issue? Why are scholars still talking about this? And why does it matter? Let's dig in. So again, why are we here? If we all accept that Ahhiyawa is the Mycenaeans, what's the point of this? Well, while Ahhiyawa is recognized as a polity in the Aegean, we still aren't entirely sure what the term is referring to specifically. And it's actually a bigger problem if it's not the Mycenaeans, because if it's not referring to the Mycenaean culture, then what is it referring to, and why are the Mycenaeans absent from the archives of the Hittites? And where is Ahhiyawa archaeologically if it's not in the Aegean? But even assuming Ahhiyawa is somehow roughly equivalent with some aspect of Mycenaean culture, what specifically is it referring to? And that's why there's still an Ahhiyawa problem. The term Mycenaean is a modern one. No one in the ancient world called themselves a Mycenaean. This is a term modern scholars began to use to refer to a particular ceramic tradition identified in excavations at the site of Mycenae in the late 1800s. It has come to stand for the people who shared not only this ceramic tradition, but a whole suite of cultural artifacts. Since the 1800s, we've come to learn a lot about this culture. Clay tablets, which were preserved when palatial complexes were burned down, have given a lot of insight into Mycenaean culture. We know they spoke an early form of Greek, written in a script called Linear B. We know about their social and political organization. They had city-states with a wanax who acted like a king, having legal, economic, and religious functions. Other titles include lawagatas, which was probably like a general or leader of the military. Several other known titles indicate positions of overseers and landowning officials. We know there were artisans who worked in specialized industries for the palace, usually the acquisition and processing of exotic goods and metals, which means that there were also large segments of the economy that were not directly controlled by the palace. This has, in part, led more recent research to suggest Mycenaean states utilized network strategies of political organization and rule, which focus on personal networks between elites, exchange of elite commodities, social differentiation, emphasis on heritage and lineal descent for legitimization, and individualizing power accumulation. These kinds of states tend to be small in scale and rather limited to the network and power any one individual can accumulate. This also means that each individual polity develops on its own trajectory, and no two look the same. That is to say, there's no one model for the Mycenaean state. Each one would look a bit different in how it was structured and how it would work. Our data indicate what we call Mycenaean is not some sort of monolithic entity, but a patchwork of variously organized networks of leaders. Now, this picture may actually sound a fair bit like the world Homer describes in the Iliad, and there are certainly a lot of connections that could be made. And so, back to Emile Fourier, the suggestion that the term Achaean, one of the several terms Homer uses to collectively refer to the Greeks, or what we may call Mycenaeans, is equivalent to the Hittite Ahhiyawa. The remaining issue is what Ahhiyawa refers to specifically. Is this a Hittite term for all the Mycenaean cultural world? Is it a reference to a specific Mycenaean polity? Is it a reference to a particular polity that represented all of the Mycenaean world? Did it change over time? Looking at the texts and what they describe may provide some insights. Now, we won't go through every single text in detail. Instead, we'll cover some of the major events discussed in texts which have the most bearing on the issue at hand. First, a cast of characters may be helpful. As we've discussed, Ahhiyawa is some sort of entity in the Aegean. The Hittites are the late Bronze Age kingdom of Hatti, with its capital at Hattusas. What these two polities are often contesting is the land, overlordship, or assistance of various polities on the western coast of Anatolia. These include the Assuwa confederacy, Arzawa, and we will mean Arzawa proper here, Wilusa, and to a lesser extent the Lucca lands. Each of these smaller polities was, at some point, involved in the political back and forth between Ahhiyawa and the Hittites. The first apparent interaction between Ahhiyawa and the Hittites is somewhat incidental and involves the Assuwa rebellion. This rebellion occurred sometime in the late 15th century during the reign of Tuthaliya I. Assuwa was a coalition of 22 cities or small regions in northwestern Anatolia, which, on a side note, included both Wilusa and Tarwusa, proposed to be Ilium and Troy or the Troad. The rebellion was put down personally by the Hittite king, and the ringleader, Piyamaradu, was taken to Hattusas along with thousands of war captives. Piyamaradu's son was installed in his place as the new leader of the coalition as a formal vassal of the Hittites. But this son too rebelled and was also defeated, ending the coalition. Now, there's no stated direct involvement of Ahhiyawa here. But in 1991, while clearing a path at the site of the Hittite capital, a bronze sword was found. The sword is not a style or form that is common to Anatolia, but was common to the 15th century Aegean. The sword also has an inscription in Akkadian reading, "As Tuthaliya the great king shattered the Assuwa country, he dedicated these swords to the storm god, his lord." From this we can then surmise this is just one of a set of swords dedicated by Tuthaliya after the defeat of the Assuwa coalition. But also, the most likely circumstance for this is that the sword was taken as loot during the campaign and then dedicated in the capital. And while it's circumstantial, the fact that the sword is made in an Aegean style strongly points to Ahhiyawan's support for the Assuwan rebellion, marking what is likely the first example in what we'll see is a long list of attempts by Ahhiyawa to meddle in Hittite politics. In the text AHT3, better known as the Indictment of Madduwatta, we have an account of the first known direct interaction between Ahhiyawa and the Hittites. The text itself dates to the reign of Millawanda I, but records the events of the reign of Tuthaliya I. The text is, as it is nicknamed, an indictment of a man called Madduwatta. The account tells how Madduwatta, who had been outside the Hittite sphere of influence, became embroiled in a conflict with a man named Attarsiya, called ruler of Ahhiya. Attarsiya attacked Madduwatta and defeated him, forcing Madduwatta to flee and seek help from Tuthaliya. The Hittite king gave him a vassalage with strict instructions for behavior, which Madduwatta ignored. We are told later that Madduwatta was again targeted by Attarsiya. Tuthaliya sent a Hittite army to defend his vassal, and the ruler of Ahhiya brought 100 chariots and 1,000 infantry. In the ensuing battle, the Hittites lost an officer, as did the forces of Attarsiya, and it seems the Hittites claimed victory as Attarsiya withdrew and went off to his own land. But Attarsiya shows up again later, raiding the shores of Alashia with Madduwatta and people from Pegaya. Alashia is said to have paid tribute to Tuthaliya, and so Madduwatta, a sworn vassal, was engaging in prohibited behavior, raiding a fellow Hittite vassal with a foreign military force no less. From this text we see Attarsiya was apparently a warlord, as he is never referred to with an official title, and he commanded a sizable military force, including chariots, as well as a naval fleet capable of long-distance raiding. It also seems Attarsiya was not interested in long-term territorial gains, instead he was just looking to raid. It also seems he did not set out to target the Hittites directly, instead looking to raid vassals and smaller targets. In the late 14th century, two texts, the 10-year Annals and Extensive Annals, dating to the reign of Mursili II, give detailed accounts of the Hittites in western Anatolia. Mursili was putting down revolts in Arzawa, but the city of Millawanda also rebelled. Millawanda is the Hittite term for the city known in classical antiquity as Miletus. Excavation at Miletus suggests Minoan influence at the site by the Middle Minoan period, and the city was destroyed and declined until the late Helladic 3A1, when a notable Mycenaean cultural presence in the city is apparent. The Annals of Mursili II record that Millawanda switched allegiance from the Hittite king to the king of Ahhiyawa. While Millawanda was returned to Hittite control, it soon again reverted to Ahhiyawan control. Millawanda, it seems, would remain a Mycenaean stronghold on the west coast of Anatolia for a century or more. We also read that the Arzawan king allied himself with the king of Ahhiyawa. The Hittite king had demanded the extradition of a number of rebels, which Arzawa rather impolitely declined. In the subsequent war, the king, Ukhuziti, was defeated, and he went into exile with his son Piyamaradu to the king of Ahhiyawa, ostensibly to some islands off the coast of Anatolia. Ukhuziti died in exile, and sometime later Ahhiyawa returned the prince, Piyamaradu, to the Hittites, pointing to a moderation in policy towards the Hittites. A somewhat later oracle text indicates the cult statue of the Ahhiyawan deity was brought out in a bid to heal the sick king, suggesting a more friendly relationship between the two polities. You certainly wouldn't invoke the deity of a hostile foreign power to seek relief. A letter exchange, perhaps by Mishuli II or Hattusili III with the king of Ahhiyawa, also indicates ongoing diplomatic correspondence. Though it is fragmentary, a possible reading of "we the brothers" may be in the vein of Near Eastern powers to refer to one another in familial terms, equals as brothers and subordinates as sons, suggesting the Hittite king was at least rhetorically discussing political matters with the king of Ahhiyawa on equal legal footing. These texts indicate not only commercial interest in Western Anatolia by Ahhiyawa, but political and military interests as well, supporting Arzawa and Millawanda in rebellion against the Hittites. Here too we have direct reference to a singular king of Ahhiyawa, though how we should understand this is not entirely clear. A prayer text dated to either Mishuli II or Muwatalli II's reign alludes to the exile of a Hittite queen. The text says, "He dispatched her to the land of Ahhiyawa beside the sea." While there's no consensus on who this may be, it is possible the queen in question is Shupililiuma's first wife Henti, who was set aside so he could marry a Babylonian princess named Tawananna, who was disliked by her stepsons, so either one may be the one referred to here given the information preserved in the tablet. Either way, this letter is a clear indication of ongoing cordial diplomatic relations between Ahhiyawa and Hatti. Further, the mention of Ahhiyawa beside the sea is a curious reference which may be interpreted in various ways. Is this Ahhiyawa by the sea to be distinguished from another Ahhiyawa, perhaps one not by the sea, or across the sea? The textual evidence of cordial relations between the two powers is mirrored in the archaeological evidence. In the late Helladic 3A2 and late Helladic 3A2 to B1 periods, there's an increase in the amount of Mycenaean ceramics on the western coast of Anatolia. This suggests the territorial disputes had been settled, with Hittite control over Arzawa secured, allowing peaceful diplomatic and commercial ties to resume. This did not last. Territorial disputes again arose. In a letter to Muwatalli II, king of Ahhiyawa, who addresses the Hittite king as his equal, wrote claiming a series of islands off the western coast of Anatolia rightfully belonged to Ahhiyawa, as they were gifted in a dowry to a king of Ahhiyawa who had married a princess of Assuwa generations earlier. This letter is notably written in Hittite and is likely a copy in translation. And this raises interesting questions of scribal culture in both Hattusas and Ahhiyawa and their fluency in the language of their neighbors. And this was not the only dispute. In a series of letters, we learn of the exploits of a man named Piyamaradu. Who this figure is not clear. He may have been ethnically Hittite, he may have been Arzawan, he has been linked with the Trojan king Priam in Homeric tradition. Whoever he was, the Hittites regarded him as a troublemaker. In the Manapa Tarhunta letter, we learn Piyamaradu defeated the Sheha River lands, who had likely been tasked by the Hittite king with defeating Piyamaradu. The far more notable letter, known as the Tawagalawa Letter, describes the exploits of Piyamaradu in more detail. Again, we see the king of Ahhiyawa addressed as a great king and called brother. In this letter, the king of the Hittites is asking for something, namely that Ahhiyawa stop supporting Piyamaradu, and so we may speculate whether this is a formal legal recognition as an equal or if he is just massaging the ego of the king he is addressing. The letter is called the Tawagalawa Letter because the king of Ahhiyawa's brother, Tawagalawa, is referenced. He's said to be in western Anatolia and collecting individuals rebelling against the Hittites to take them to Ahhiyawa. One of these was Piyamaradu. Piyamaradu was given asylum in Ahhiyawan territory, which the Hittite king found objectionable, as Piyamaradu was believed to be the ringleader of anti-Hittite sentiment in western Anatolia. And somewhat interestingly, this dispute included the territory of Wilusa on the northwestern coast. The Hittites seem to have gotten the edge on Ahhiyawa by the reign of Tudhaliya IV. A boundary list dated to the reign of Hattusili III mentions Ahhiyawa, and though the list is fragmentary, it indicates Ahhiyawa was still in control and exerting influence in western Anatolia. However, Tudhaliya IV records how Ahhiyawan influence in the Sheha Riverlands was ended and how he subsequently ended Ahhiyawan influence over Millawanda. Ahhiyawa's decline is further noted in a copy of the vassal treaty between the Hittite king Tudhaliya IV and Shashgamua, the king of Amurru. In one passage, Tudhaliya lists the great kings he is equal of. And Ahhiyawa was written, and while the clay was still soft, it was crossed down. Ahhiyawa was also included in an embargo against Assyria, who had arisen as the dominant power in northern Mesopotamia and a threat to Hittite interests in Syria. This embargo is sometimes cited as a reason why Mycenaean artifacts are largely absent from central Anatolia. In a few final Late Bronze Age references, there are mentions of Ahhiyawan men in the Luka lands. In letters written in Akkadian to the king of Ugarit, the king is instructed to make shipments of metal to these Ahhiyawan men. Modern commentators believe these Ahhiyawan men were serving the Hittite king as mercenaries, and so the Ugaritic king, also a vassal of the Hittite king, was instructed to equip them. If this is the case, we can safely assume Ahhiyawan political influence in Anatolia was long gone. After about 1200, the Hittite king collapsed, and we have no more records from them. Given the evidence at hand, the equation of Ahhiyawa with the Achaeans or Mycenaean world seems persuasive. But we turn to our original Ahhiyawa problem. To what exactly does the term Ahhiyawa refer? And how do we rectify that with what we know archaeologically about the Mycenaeans? One option is the Hittites used Ahhiyawa in much the same way we use the term Mycenaean, as a general ethno-cultural or even geographical identification. Ahhiyawa could just be the people on the other side of the Aegean, the way Hurry is used by the Hittites to refer to Hurrian speakers and not a specific political entity. If Homer is right that Achaean was a term that could be used to refer to all the Greeks, is this simply how the Hittites are using this term? It's plausible, even likely, the Hittites got the term Ahhiyawa from the Mycenaeans themselves, hearing their term for self-identification, and it got recorded as Ahhiyawa in Hittite sources. So, is it a general cultural or geographical term referring to all the people of this shared culture? Maybe. But how do we handle the term king of Ahhiyawa? It's hard to have a king of a culture. King implies a recognizable political entity, that there was someone in Ahhiyawa that the king of the Hittites could recognize as a king and recognize as a peer. So perhaps Ahhiyawa refers to a kind of confederacy, the way Assuwa was a confederacy of cities and regions. If this is the case, then we can ask, with whom did the Hittite king correspond? Was there a recognized nucleus of power, maybe at Mycenae, that stood at the front of an Achaean confederation as a primer inter pares? Was one ruler recognized as the outward-facing representative of the Mycenaean world despite the complexities of intra-regional differences? Homer presents Agamemnon as just such a figure. But whether or not we accept Agamemnon as a historical figure, we can ask if an Agamemnon-like leader was able to wield control over all of the Achaeans and corresponded with foreign powers on their behalf. A number of scholars have suggested as much. Or to take it a step further, was there a unified Mycenaean kingdom? Was one city-state able to exert enough dominance over all the others so that there existed, at least officially, a stable polity in the Aegean dominated by one kingdom in one city? Or perhaps does Ahhiyawa refer to a specific kingdom among many? Did the Hittites correspond with one kingdom consistently and treat it as a representative of the entire culture, even if those cities were not unified in any sense of the term? Did the seat of power shift over time? Mycenae is often suggested as such a kingdom, though Thebes has also been suggested, as have other sites like Argos and Orchomenos. The textual evidence is simply not definitive here. We cannot be certain what the written sources imply exactly. We also have no foreign archive from the Mycenaean palace sites. Foreign correspondences were either not kept, or we just simply haven't found such an archive yet. So we don't have an emic Mycenaean perspective on this issue. Archaeologically, the data point to multiple relatively modest polities on the Greek mainland. Some scholars have included Egyptian textual sources with the Hittite sources and have proposed the outlines of a Mycenaean polity, but this is only ever tentatively identified, as the evidence for it is not particularly strong. The archaeological evidence for a unified kingdom is even weaker. The archaeological evidence strongly points to a network strategy of state formation where smaller scale polities developed around local dynasties engaged in elite competition. These strategies are believed to have been so important that it's even been suggested the very phenomenon of the state in the Mycenaean world is an emergent phenomenon of these network strategies employed by late Bronze Age Helletic elites. The archaeological evidence strongly contraindicates a politically unified pan-Mycenaean polity. So, where does that leave us? Well, with an Ahhiyawa problem. While the Ahhiyawa problem shifts over time, from identifying where it is, to what it should be identified with, to what exactly it refers to, the Ahhiyawa problem doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. Scholars continue to debate how to rectify the archaeological data with textual sources, and these discussions tend to generate more heat than light. But the debates continue. Someday the Ahhiyawa problem may be resolved, but we're not there yet.